I'm Richard Heathen, and this is Liberty Machine News on the Voluntary Virtues Network. Once again, I am joined by Josh Steffler, a Liberty Machine News contributor and the lead organizer for one of the lead organizers for We Are Change Victoria. How you doing, Josh?
I'm doing great, Richard. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Yeah. So
You feeling
tonight,
better from last week?
oh, I'm still a little under the weather, but we will keep going. The Train for Liberty, the Liberty Machine stops for nobody. We are on a course for liberty and liberty-minded people and liberty-based news. We will not stop for cold. And so today we're going to talk about some new articles up on libertymachinenews.com. Specifically about the United Nations, Part 2 and Part 3 of my series on the UN as world government. And interestingly, despite its years of promoting warlords, the numerous hateful and oppressive regimes that call the United Nations home, and just the kind of numerous scandals, including the DynCorp sex trafficking scandal, and the scandal of the other huge scandals, including the UN getting caught aiding communist China and other regimes in its coercive population control measures. What do you say about that, Josh?
You're well. What is there to say? I think people that are involved in a liberty movement and a freedom movement know that the United Nations is not a friend to sovereign nations. It's not a friend to people who wish to manifest their own destiny and decide their own course in their lives and their lives in their countries. Our work is cut out for us because sadly the left wing works very hard to give United Nations this fake legitimacy that it has, but it really has no legitimacy. With the human trafficking scandal that they were involved with in the forced sterilization, they can't have any legitimacy. Tyrants and dictators have esteemed spaces in the halls of the United Nations. And while we do need to have an open dialogue to talk to these people and find ways to solve our solutions through dialogue, it's a joke to have places like China sitting on the human rights tribunals in the United Nations. They're a joke. They're a joke. And we have these politicians that are campaigning for an elected United Nations parliament. I don't want to elect people in the United Nations because I don't want the United Nations governing over where I live, where you live, anywhere in the borders of Canada. Most people understand that the people that live in the area are the best stewards of that land and that country. I don't want North Korea or
Telling us what we
Russia
can do with
or
our land.
even the United Kingdom.
No, exactly.
Pardon?
We don't want unelected bureaucrats from any part of the world telling us what to do. I think it's really interesting because despite the UN's numerous scandals, they still have an air of legitimacy. Their biggest PR problem isn't the fact that they were caught in a scandal, a sex trafficking scandal, working with DynCorp. For those who aren't familiar with what I'm talking about, this might jog your memory. Cynthia McKinney, she was a congresswoman who, and she was actually grilling. It was a video from 2004 when she was a congresswoman. She was grilling Donald Rumsfeld about the United States, the Bush administration handing government contracts to DynCorp because DynCorp was caught in this United Nations sex scandal. And I find it really telling that it's the UN's biggest PR problem is that it's just a bloated bureaucracy that's ineffective. None of and not the fact that it was caught trafficking that its members were caught trafficking little girls in I can't remember the country, but they've actually, this is a very high profile case. They actually was a movie made about it. And they even changed the name
with people and their access to the internet.
Oh yeah, you can look it up. Go look up.
They'll find.
Just look it up. It's
it's easy enough to type in.
It's easy enough to type in and find
UN sex scandal, and it'll come up.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really easy to find. But yeah, I think the biggest, most interesting thing is because of the left cover that the UN has, because of its far left wing agenda, it actually has it has left cover, so no one talks about the sex scandals. No one talks about the fact that they were caught. They actually had their funding. The United Nations Population Fund actually had their funding cut during the Bush administration because they were caught funding the forced population and forced abortions and forced sterilizations in China. They had actually some church group go down and investigate, and they put enough pressure, and the grassroots Republican kind of people put enough pressure on the Bush administration that it forced them to basically cancel the funding for the United Nations Population Fund. So this is really, documented thing, but no one wants to talk about this. They just look at the UN as, just this bloated bureaucracy. But here in Canada, the reason the left cover comes from mainstream party leaders. It comes from people who were Jack Layton. He was the leader of the NDP. A lot of people liked Layton. He was a charismatic leader. His wife, or his widow, I guess, because Layton, he died not long ago, his wife is signed on to this petition for United Nations elected parliament. Justin Trudeau, the guy who's most likely going to be the next Prime Minister of Canada, he signed on to this. The Green Party leader, who is a sitting MP, she signed on to this. So the UN has a lot of allies and cover from the left wing here in Canada. So, you there, Josh?
Well, and if people go to that website, if people go, I hope you link that website that shows all of the treasonous people in Canada that are signing on for this support for a UN government. It's at unpacampaign.org. And you can go on and look by country and see all these people. And there are 69 members of our parliament that are elected to represent Canada that are treasonously looking to create another level of government that is not part of our sovereign nation, that has no accountability, that has no transparency whatsoever. And then if you look more, there's non-governmental organizations, and some of these are just a joke. Like Occupy Canada is suggesting that we get the United Nations Parliamentary Assembly. No, thank you. No.
Well, all this comes from the idea, the failed paradigm of the idea that the state, that government can solve complex social issues. Like, the government aggresses against its citizens every day, so it's no surprise that they would be treasonous and want to rob us of what little say we have in the parliamentary system and create one more layer of statism. This is really an extension of the philosophy of government. Because honestly, if you think government is a good way to solve complex social issues, then why not a world government? Really, because it's an extension of the failed philosophy of statism that has resulted in the deaths of hundreds of millions in the 20th century alone.
Okay, so if you get your listeners to go and check out that website, unpacampaign.org, you can go on there and see all of the treasonous politicians elected members of parliament, professors, non-governmental organizations that are suggesting that we undermine our national sovereignty for this super sovereignty, this
Well, I
new
don't,
world
national
government.
sovereignty is not an issue. Like, it's the state. The state is wrong and it's bad, and it doesn't really matter, like, if it is controlled by other people, because it's still state. It's still government. Government is the problem. There's no such,
Oh
I
yeah.
think there's too much, there's too much made in the kind of, in the resistance movement, in the liberty movement about national sovereignty. Quite frankly, I wipe my ass on national sovereignty because it's still a nation. I don't want a nation. I don't want a state. But a global state is worse than a nation state because its power is that much more removed from the individual. So, I don't really, national sovereignty I could give a fuck about, to be honest. I just I would love to see the nation of Canada and every nation just go.
But
be gone.
imagine, it's so hard to even talk to our federal elected people. Imagine how difficult it would be to have to deal with another level, this world government, this world state that has superpowers. Like, imagine now you need a license to travel on UN oceans. You need a license to travel in UN airspace. This is absolutely a horrible idea, and I don't agree
Well, you're
with
very
it
right.
at all.
They are trying
These
to.
people are committing treason.
Well, you have to
And
understand the UN is already trying to claim what they call the global commons. That's the seas, that's the air, that's all that kind of stuff. So that's exactly what they want to do. They want to claim the global commons. But let's talk about, like, how this is kind of, in Canada, this is kind of a dangerous thing, because there is a lot of people from mainstream parties who are pushing this crap, and then we also have, like you said, the Occupy, the far left in Canada, that's Occupy Canada, that is actually pushing for this too. So again, what we're seeing is, again, the full spectrum dominance paradigm that we were talking about last week, where you have pressure from the top and pressure from the bottom to create an appearance of a legitimate movement, when it's really just orchestrated and controlled and manipulated.
You cut out on the last second there.
Well, I just said they were controlled and manipulated. The whole thing is full spectrum dominance. It's the same strategy with Agenda 21. Is a grassroots movement from the bottom and and pressure coming from the top too. So it is, like I said, full spectrum dominance.
Full spectrum dominance from a group of dictators. Yeah, it's full spectrum dominance, and the UN is massively populated with dictators and autocrats. Like, these are the people that we are suggesting should be world leaders. No, thank you. I don't need Saudi Arabia or Vietnam or Algeria, China. None of these places have any business telling me how to live my life, and I'm overtaxed already in Canada. Imagine how much prosperity and wealth will be drained from your listeners' pockets, my pockets, your mother's pockets, all to feed this super bureaucracy, these powerful autocrats that get to live the high life off our tax dollars. We get a terrible, terrible amount of value or amount of service for the taxes that these people steal from us. Now, what's going to happen? Where is the authority going to come from for the UN to start taxing us? A global carbon tax? A global population tax? No.
The thing is,
not
like
even
I said
up
earlier,
for debate.
Like I said earlier, this is just this is just the paradigm of statism kind of taken to the next level, right? That's, if you think government is a good arbiter or solver of complex social issues, then then why not a world government, right? Because that's it's just an extension of the failed idea of statism. But another thing I want to shift gears on this article, and you touched on it, is that the group, how the United Nations really is, the majority of them, they should, the majority of the nations of the United Nations don't even make the pretense of being like free nations. Some of the most brutal dictatorships in all of the world are member states of the United Nations, and actually, they had a kind of meeting some of the more totalitarian regimes. I think it's called the Group of 77, even though there's like 133 nations in there. And they called for a new world order for living well, basically calling for a federalization of the United Nations. They basically called for massive wealth transfers and technology from the Western taxpayers to these corrupt, despotic dictatorships, central planning, and, of course, sustainable development, which basically is central planning and a huge monolithic state telling everyone how to live their lives.
Oh, yeah.
No, it's interesting because, some of the most oppressive regimes, including China, North Korea, El Salvador, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and many more, were part of this declaration from the Group of 77 for a new world order for living well. Basically, a new world order for them to live well off the productive energies of Western taxpayers and Western tax cows, because that's really what we are to these people. We're just a resource to be harvested.
Well, we're not really taxpayers. We're more like tax victims, because you don't get a say if you're going to pay them or not, and it's theft. It's absolutely theft, and these people just don't know how to listen when somebody says no. I don't want to live under communism. I don't like the United Nations idea of social justice. You know what a real idea of social justice is? I keep what I earn, and I fund the things that I find have value, and I socially engineer the world to the way I would like to see it, and you keep your earnings, and you fund the things that you enjoy, and you socially engineer the world in a way that you want to see, rather than have these centrally planned, which are pretty much left-wing progressive agendas and social engineering, which is completely anti-freedom. It's completely anti-choice. And it's weird that you've got these left-wing progressives that talk about abortion choice, and yet that's the only thing you're allowed to choose on. If you want to choose anything else, the pro-choice movement, you are a right-wing fascist, you hate civilization, I want choice. I want voluntary interaction. I want to be the social engineer with my earnings.
Well, the whole thing is, like, you touched on something. I guess we'll use that as a pivot to go to my next article, The UN as World Government, Part 3, Social Engineering, Progressivism, and the Post-2015 Sustainable, or Post-15 Development Goals, which, again, is part of Agenda 21. Now, the UN has a deliberately and decidedly left-wing progressive agenda. They're out there. And like I said, it makes sense. It makes sense why the progressives would flock to the UN, because the progressives see not just the United Nations, but nationalism, see the state as a way to fix complex social issues. They are really like the enemies of free humanity. It really is absolutely ridiculous. But like, my next article talks about the 17 goals that are been kind of proposed for the post-2015 development goals. They are they all sound really lovey-dovey. They sound like great goals. Who wouldn't want to help the disadvantaged of the world? But when you look closer, with the critical eye, you see these goals can only come out of the government's ability, are only the ability of the government to accomplish anything by the state. Like, if you, the government has failed to end poverty and do all this other stuff on the national, provincial, state, municipal levels. Why do you think a global government can do this? I want to go through some of these goals, and you can kind of stop me if you just have anything to say about them. Like I said, the first one is end poverty in all its forms. Like, sounds great, but it doesn't really. If the government could do that, the national governments of the world would have already done that.
It would have already happened. It would have already happened, but you can't end poverty by stealing from some people and giving it to others.
And you can't rob Peter to pay Paul, because eventually Paul runs out of money. Eventually run out of other people's money.
And when you keep putting your boot on somebody's throat, they're going to lose the incentive to work harder, to create wealth. Governments are traps.
All right, another one I want to talk about is number 5, is attain gender equality and empower women and girls everywhere. This is like total like feminist nonsense. Like feminism has been exposed as a utter joke. It's completely false. Like the main assumptions that the feminists have about society are just wrong. They're just unabashedly wrong. They've been proven wrong. There's nothing that's been more wrong. The patriarchy doesn't exist. Men have brunted the force of of human society for as long as it's been around. Yeah, women didn't get the vote, but men got conscripted and sent off to war and die. Women didn't have to go to war and die. Women have been honestly protected through men's sacrifices throughout history. The reason for this is women are they're protected more because one guy can happily do the job of 100 men when it comes to the reproduction. One woman doesn't work if there's 100 men and one woman, but one man, 100 women, that works. You know what I mean? It's just a basic kind of biology. So that's why society really has been organized the way it has. I know there's been those who've kind of covered these issues in great detail, but just kind of a brief overview of it. But just look at some of the statistics. Most of the workplace deaths in the workplace, men. Suicides, men. Most people homicides, I think. Most people killed, men. Men are much more likely to be the victims of violence in this society than women. So the feminists have absolutely everything wrong, and their assumptions are ass backwards.
Well, and it's kind of a fallacy to suggest that there are gender-specific rights. They're human rights. They're birth rights. You get them because you're born, not because you're a woman, not because you're a man. And if government, again, could attain gender equality, it would have done it a long time ago. But
I'm sorry, but you can't have equality is such a misnomer because no two people are equal. I'm sorry, but you can't have equality. Egalitarianism is just basically tying everyone down to the lowest common denominator because not everyone is as smart as everyone else. Not everyone is as strong as everyone else. Everyone has unique talents and abilities. Mm-hmm. You cannot force equality on anyone. The attempt to do so is just going to be the worst kind of tyranny you've ever seen, ever.
And it would be a pretext to enforce almost like negative rights, not to raise women up, but to push men down. And that's not equality at all.
Yeah, this article is going to be up at libertymachinenews.com, so if you're interested, check this out. But I'm just going to go race through some of these other ones. Secure water and sanitation for all sustainable world. for a sustainable world, excuse me. Secure water and sanitation for all for a sustainable world. Now, again, the government cannot manage scarce resources. It doesn't work like that. The Austrian economics shows that the government lacks the price indicators and the incentives to manage precious resources efficiently. The market needs to do that because the market is just more. You lack the price controls.
It's just how the market works.
Well, exactly.
The market
you need the
works
price controls
because it works.
Prices are. We have to look at what prices are. Prices are information. Prices say why you should use one thing for another thing. It's if I didn't have prices, you wouldn't know to use iron for a railroad instead of gold because you don't use gold because gold is scarce and therefore it's really expensive. You use iron because it's plentiful, and that's the way the market directs people on how to use and allocate precious resources. And so the whole idea is this whole thing is just it's socialism. It really is socialism, probably communism. The whole go on.
It's authoritarianism, and it's the idea that water is actually a scarce resource when, our atmosphere, 94% of the greenhouse gases in our atmosphere are water vapor. The oceans and what happens when governments get involved is they hyper regulate so people can't build water desalination plants to give their friends water or their neighbors water. They can't build the things that they need to use the resources that they have at hand. And we don't even know how much water is here. These guys like to have this illusion that they know how much water we have. It was just recently discovered that there is a massive aquifer underneath the Earth's crust, that there is more water than we could ever use.
And that's why we need privatization, so someone has an incentive to go in there and get that water and provide it efficiently to people, right? So, I don't know. We got to move on here, but I want to talk about the global Green New Deal. The global green, between 1933 and 1939, President Franklin D. Roosevelt introduced what he called the New Deal.
Which wasn't a good deal.
No, it was a
he didn't call it the good deal.
It was a New Deal. The New Deal involved vast government expansion, intervention in the economy, despite Keynesian economics. Basically, he created Social Security, minimum wage laws, all these things that the progressives kind of glorify today that just really aren't that great. The net result of all of this has been to basically indebt the children of the United States, the population of the United States, and specifically the children, into the largest debt in human history. But yeah, so after 2008, in 2009, not long after the collapse of the financial markets, the UN wrote a policy paper calling for global Green New Deal. What this global Green New Deal amounted to was the acceleration of United Nations Agenda 21.
Hyper acceleration. It's
exactly.
Like a 8-lane freeway with an 8-lane autobahn for driving down the Agenda 21 highway.
Oh, exactly. The recommendations of it included domestic reforms should address common issues of land use and urban planning, that is central planning. That's Agenda 21. We're going to tell you how hyper regulate, hyper manage how you manage land resources.
That's the elimination of private property.
Oh, exactly.
It's the elimination of private property, and I think your listeners, that's all they need to know, is that I think we all value private property because I'm private property. I live on private property, and my property is important. Right?
Oh, exactly.
And this is the problem with the left, is they see property as theft, and it's not theft. Taxes are theft. When I take even small children know that when you take something without asking, that's theft. Property is not theft because you've paid for it. You've gone into some voluntary interaction between people. I get sick and tired of having to defend property and private property, and the UN is constantly undermining private property with this idea of scarcity.
Oh, yeah,
There's enough land and there's enough property, and I don't want them telling me how to use my property.
Fair enough. I just want to go through these goals really quick. They wanted to create a carbon market through the Copenhagen process under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. That's just a scam. The whole carbon market is it's another tax. It's another way to rob the people, to pillage
take
the pockets,
away your wealth,
to pillage the pockets of the everyday human being and line the pockets of the government bureaucrats and the elite. They want sustainable transport. That's basically a world without cars. At least not cars for you and me. The
UN
ruling
will
elect
still
would
get to...
the ruling elite and those on top will still get their cars. Just you and me won't get our cars.
Yeah,
And
we'll have to walk.
Yeah, or use their transport, their crappy public transport.
Public transports that are vehicles for disease spreading and
It's just about controlling where you can go and destroying the ability for free mobility for human beings.
It's another attack on our property.
Another one of the other recommendations was sustainable development, development of sustainable energies and the smart grid. Well, I wrote an article not long about the smart grid and quoted actual industry papers saying how the smart grid is a two-way information grid and how they can go into your home. Basically, the smart grid will tell them what what appliances you're using, how you're using, how much energy you're using, where you're using that energy, and they can actually go through the smart grid. They can go in and shut off your appliances. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's documented in industry. It's industry papers and industry reports. I document it in one of my articles on Liberty Machine News. So this is wholly true. The smart meter, the smart grid is basically a slave grid. It's just for them to basically
it's a surveillance grid.
It's a surveillance grid, but it's also a control grid. They can they can go in and turn on and off your appliances. That means they can ration the amount of energy you use. Of course, you know what I mean? So
and it's another way. The only way it works is through government force, because once people find out how crappy the idea of the smart grid is, they want to say no. And so government comes in with its force and its boots and just gives you the boots and says, no, you're taking this smart grid whether you like it or not.
Yeah, why don't you go into some of the battles you've had in BC, because it started to be, the smart meters have been implemented in BC, or being installed anyway.
Well, they've got about 94%, 95% completion. I don't have a smart meter. I've managed to maintain authority over my home and my property, and I have an old analog meter, but it's getting harder and harder. They're gouging us $35 a month just to read this meter. There's a class action lawsuit that people are filing to stop the smart grid. And really, the voluntary approach, this is the first time in history that you've been forced to get an upgrade in technology, and it's going to cost you more to keep the old technology. The way the market works is new stuff comes out. Oh, awesome. I'm going to buy that because I want it. Not new stuff comes out, and now the government is going to point guns at you and force you to take it.
All right, we're kind of out of time, but I'm going to go into overdrive here. I think, the VVN, I'll probably just keep this on the Voluntary Virtues Network. It'll just be on the show. My show's not streamed live. It's just up there, so it should be fine. But we got to snap through this quick there.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you about the indoctrination through UNESCO. A report through UNESCO, that is the United Nations Scientific and Cultural Organization. United Nations Education, Scientific, Cultural Organization. It's big. That's a huge mouthful, and it's a huge scope of to basically, it's a huge scope of, I don't know what you'd call it, topics, I guess. Anyways, the report is titled "Global Citizen Education." It states it represents a conceptual shift in that it reorganizes the relevance of education in understanding and resolving global issues in their social, political, cultural, economic, and environmental dimensions. It also acknowledges the role of education in moving beyond the development of knowledge and cognitive skills and into building values. So right there, the UN admits that they're trying to use their influence in education through UNESCO to socially engineer the attitudes of young people. It's ridiculous. It's the same thing.
It's manipulating education.
Oh, totally. But this is the same thing that the progressive education movement of the early 20th century, mid and early 20th century was focused on. So these aren't new ideas. This is just a regurgitation of the same collectivist authoritarian bullshit that we've been fed throughout our entire lives, except now they're taking it to a global level.
It's new neo-Marxism, neo-communism. It's all about collective identities, and it's not teaching kids critical thinking, and it's not teaching you how to think. It is programming you what to think, and it's a complete assault on individuality and your right and ability to define yourself.
Oh, exactly. This report talks about teaching children collective identity. And you know what I mean? So now you're going to be defined on the group you belong to. So if you're Native, that's your identity. You're Native and you're a victim because colonialism 100 years ago and all this stuff. So you're a victim. You know, they're going to look.
And it perpetuates racism.
It perpetuates racism and victim complex. And I'm sick of it. So this really is a way of robbing kids of their personal identity and trying to pigeonhole them into some collective identity so they're more easily controlled.
Well, and again, UNESCO is a massive underminer of property rights all across the world. All across the world. When you get a UNESCO site in your province or your country, you can't do anything in it anymore. It's like literally in Agenda 21, pretty much no human zone, no development zone.
Oh yeah, it's ridiculous. They have the UNESCO World Heritage sites all over Canada now. It's disgusting. We're just slowly getting seeped into a UN takeover. Another thing they focus the global they're trying to teach people to be. It's called global citizenship education. They're trying to indoctrinate people into global.
They're succeeding. Richard, my children are in grade 8, and do you know what their social studies textbook was called this year? Global citizenship.
Wow.
And my kids are not global citizens. They're Canadian citizens. They're British Columbians. They're not global citizens because a global
we're not citizens
citizen
of the UN, that's for sure.
Yeah, would imply that there's a global government. A citizen is a resident of
a country.
That
yes. Now, you know, if you want to say, "Oh, I'm a global citizen," then I don't recognize myself as any state. That's fine. I still hate that rhetoric because it's just got that really greasy.
It's statist rhetoric.
Yeah, it's total statist rhetoric, except it's directed at a global state, and so things are going to be. You know, there is a push for a global state, and I don't. They're trying to say that a lot of libertarians and ANCAPs they dismiss it. Oh, its state is so ineffective. Well, it's only ineffective because it's ineffective, but it's still going to be effective at, you know, sucking all the wealth away from you and me, right? There's an economic collapse coming. I want to actually talk about Detroit. They had a lot of people in Detroit aren't able to pay their bills, and all of a sudden, there's activists who are demanding the United Nations pay their water bills, and so this is what's going to happen when the financial collapse happens. People are going to just run to the United Nations to fill the void of government. And, you know, I think the UN is going to be more than happy to kind of provide that, to fill that void for them, because in the end, it'll give them legitimacy and it'll give them a way to expand their power.
And it'll help them create their bureaucratic megastate that they want to create and take away the last vestiges of freedom that humanity has been fighting for thousands of years. It wants to pour statist communist water all over the fires of liberty, and I'm not having it.
No, exactly. Well, another thing is this global citizenship education, as they call it, global citizen education. It focuses heavily on sustainable development. See, Agenda 21, it's not just environmentalism. There's a social aspect to Agenda 21 too, and this is where you get this global citizenship education. You get the social justice. That's another thing. This thing goes into this report goes into social justice. Well, social justice is just a left-wing term that basically means that a person is owed something by the group simply for the fact that they exist. This far left-wing concept is basically mostly meaningless. This whole idea, the whole word is mostly meaningless. Anytime the far left protests something they don't like, they raise the banner of social justice. Social justice is championed anytime a group wants to infringe on the rights of the individual. Some people define social justice as the ability to the ability for people to realize their potential in the society where they live. That is from a book called The Theory of Justice, John Rawls. But it's so vague. It can encompass just about anything. It can encompass just about anything. You can use that for to call for anything. You know what I mean? To justify any kind of state intervention in the economy. And like I said, and the United Nations, I want to read to you what the United Nations says in their report on social justice, is that social justice is not possible without strong and coherent redistributive policies conceived and implemented by public agencies. That is government. So they can't have social justice unless there's an agency of government to take your money and give it to someone else.
And it's theft, it's robbery, and it's amazing
robbing
that they've
Peter
managed
to bribe Paul. It's fucking gross.
It's amazing that they've managed to cloak these criminal actions in a disguise of benevolence, social justice, and this soft, loving character when it is a crime to steal. Governments punish people for stealing, and yet they're stealing.
Well, this is more
redistribution is not benevolent or benign. It is theft. It is violence.
Oh yeah, if I rob you, I'm redistributing your wealth to me. But the thing is, all of this shit is just flowery euphemisms that basically reinforce what we talked about earlier, and that is the far left-wing paradigm that people are being encouraged. Yeah, far left-wing paradigm that's failed, that the UN is pushing. And it's being taught here in Canada. This nonsense is already being taught in Canada, as you documented, in Canadian schools, in a resource guide given to Toronto teachers called An Educator's Guide for An Educator's Guide for Changing the World. It states, this is a quote directly from it, page 5, "We want to emphasize that our identity is socially constructed and de-emphasize the role of personal choice and personal agency. This is key. We are asking them, the children, to consider that their lives are largely a function of their identity, their gender, their race, class. This identity is not something they can control and is typically something they're born into and unlikely to change. Just as their own accomplishments are tied to their identity, so too is everyone else's accomplishments or lack thereof tied to their identity." So you're not responsible for what you do in life, Josh. Your identity, it determines what you can and cannot do. This is just robbing children of the idea of personal agency. No more are we taught, you can be whatever you want, you can achieve whatever you want. You just have to work hard, put your nose to it, and you can do it. It doesn't matter where you start. You can be at the top. You can start from the lowest, poorest guy in society and be one of the richest guys. No, not through that. Now it's, if you don't succeed, now your destiny is predetermined by your class, your race, you're all this bullshit, and you can't change that. This is totally this is raw. This is so evil. This is fucking evil. This is robbing children of their fucking futures and their identity just so they can fucking scrab a little power. This is just grinds my fucking gears, man. These guys are tyrants and they're pathetic and they disgust me.
That could be a epitaph on the tombstone of liberty, because to suggest that we are not the masters of our own destiny is inhuman. Humans have been the masters of our destiny for so long. Look at all the people that worked their way up from the bottom and raised themselves out of poverty. Look at all the people that came from uneducated families that worked their ass off to get into higher education. That is saying that you can't. You didn't
do that, Josh. You can't do that. Yeah. It's only identity and racial politics and blah fucking nonsense that matters. All right, man.
And it only works when there's government force.
No, I know. We got to shut her down here, bud. We're into overdrive, and I got to shut her down. But any final thoughts? Because this got me kind of fired up. This pisses me off.
The Marxists cannot win. They have failed time and time and time again. You there is only so much of other people's money that you can spend before you run out of other people's money. And we're gathering libertarians and anarcho-capitalists and voluntarists every day when people bump into this boot, this cage of the state and the government, and liberty is rising. And through television and shows like this, Liberty Machine News, and the good people of We Are Change Victoria, and all of the other powerful Liberty new media members out there, we're going to spread this fire and we're going to win because we can't lose. If we lose, there's no freedom left.
No, exactly. All this all, like the social ideas, the economics, all of it comes down to just disgusting Marxism. It's, you know, it's cultural and economic Marxism. It's a war on free humanity. It's a war on anyone who claims self-ownership. This is a war on anyone who claims self-ownership. That's really what this boils down to. And you know, I think we really need to start focusing on. We need to start focusing on the construction of the global state, because you know this is happening here and now. And if you know. If you don't like state power, you're not going to like it when it becomes when it's raised to that global level. Now, yes, we can't lose.
We can't lose. And these people that are pushing this have names and faces. It's not some cloudy conspiracy theory internet Illuminati. There are real people. Like
and we
in
documented
Canada,
them.
we've
We
got
documented
Justin
them.
Trudeau. We've got Thomas Mulcair. We've got Elizabeth May. We've got all of these self-identified progressives that are the names and faces of the end of free humanity.
They're collaborators. Call it what they are. They're tyrants and they're fucking collaborators. All right, Josh, I gotta go. This has been Liberty Machine News on the Voluntary Virtues Network. Thank you for watching.